most useful. It may not be that way for everybody. To track the hydrogen ions. Do we have too much? Do we have too little? It's all about the hydrogen ions. Where are they? So, where do hydrogen ions, where are they manufactured in our body? What's the normal process? We talked about it. In our stomach. Our acids hang out in our stomach. Our bases, or bicarbonate, really hang out in our GI tract. So if I have a lot of acids, and we look at acid-base, that's really being in balance. What's our normal pH? Okay. So 7.35 and below is what? Acid. I would really strongly encourage you on your test to make this little key. And you write acid over here. I can't tell you how many times students put the wrong way. It's get flipped around. If it's below 7.35, we're talking about acid being acidic. 7.45. Above that is alkaline. Okay? Now, what that would mean is that, let's say we know that acids hang out in the stomach. If I would start vomiting a lot, over and over, what am I losing in my vomit? Okay, we're talking about acid-base right now. We're going to leave potassium. Acids. That would put us at risk for what? Being too alkaline. Being too alkaline, right. So we always have to look at where are we losing it? And what does that put them into? What's the body going to do to try and get back into balance? We talked about compensatory mechanisms. We have a buffering system that works all the time, constantly keeping us in balance. Okay. But if we get too many acids, the body has a mechanism to try and keep us into balance. What is that mechanism if the buffering system is not enough? And how long does it take to work? What's the system? How long does it take to work? It's what? Well, what's the first? It's a sequential. There's an initial response when the buffering system isn't enough. What starts first? Respiratory. How long does it take to act to work? How long does it take to initiate a respiratory compensatory mechanism? Minutes. Anybody getting a rush? Getting in here? Short breath? It's because of your lactic acid. It's the byproduct of muscle activity. It increases, could put us into acidosis. Our body knows that. Our first compensatory mechanism, respiratory, kicks in gear in minutes. Now, no one's hyperventilating right now. When you get back into balance, what happens to your respiratory rate? Slows to normal. Normal rate, normal depth. So when people use a lot of muscle activity, your byproduct is lactic acid. In minutes, the respiratory rate increases in rate and depth to blow off what? Carbonic acid, CO2. That thereby lowers your acids, puts you back into normal pH. Your respiratory rate goes back to normal. All is good. Let's say that you've got a condition where that's not sufficient. That a respiratory compensatory mechanism isn't enough to get us into balance. What's the next system that puts us back, that starts to work to try and get us back in equilibrium? Avery, it's time. The kidneys. It takes 2 to 3 days for those to kick into gear. How will they compensate if I have too many acids on board? Doesn't matter what kind of acids. I have too much hydrochloric acid, I have too much CO2, I have too much lactic acid. What are they going to do?
Increase urine output.
Increase urinary output of what? Is it a fluid issue? It's not a fluid issue. It's an issue of what?
Too much acid.
Hydrogen ions. If I'm in acidosis, it's a problem of hydrogen ions. I have too many. What are the kidneys going to do, Rob?
Work more.
What?
Work more.
By doing what? Well, my respiratory rate blew off hydrogen ions in the form of carbonic acid, and that wasn't enough. And so my kidneys are going to kick into gear. Well, they've been urinating and filtering. But now they're going to filter what out?
More.
Hydrogen ions.
Gotcha.
They're going to filter out hydrogen ions. What's going to happen to my urinary pH? It's going to go down. It's going to get more acidic because there's hydrogen ions in there. Now the trade-off of that, the problem with that, is that they hold on to potassium to get rid of the hydrogen ions. So now what happens to me? I get a hydrogen problem. Question? I saw your hand. Now, let's go through that same process. And I don't have enough hydrogen ions. I'm alkalotic. It can be a variety of reasons I'm alkalotic. I have an upset stomach. So I use my family recipe of sodium bicarbonate. And I drink a lot of antacids. And I wind up, didn't mean to, I wind up too alkalotic. And my buffering system can't manage. See, my buffering system keeps me in a 7.35 to 7.45 all the time. But this situation, or disease situation, overrides that. Can't do enough. What's the first system to kick into gear? Respiratory. And how long does it take? Minutes. What's it going to do? Because now, being alkalotic, I don't have enough what? Hydrogen ions. What's the respiratory system to do to get more hydrogen ions? I'm sure it was right.
Hold on to CO2. It's going to hold the CO2 by...
Okay, by doing what? To the respiratory?
Increasing the respiratory...
Decrease rate and depth of your respiratory system. That way I hold on to carbonic acid to put me back into normal pH. We have a wonderful compensatory system. So, I've had some kind of situation where I wind up alkalotic. That means I don't have enough hydrogen ions. So my body's going to compensate in minutes by slowing and making shallow my respiratory system to hold on to carbonic acid. Oh my goodness, it turns out that's not enough. What's the next step? Kidney. How long does that take? About 2 to 3 days. What's it going to do, Michaela? I don't have enough hydrogen ions. What are we going to do? Hold on to the hydrogen at the expense of what? Potassium. Hold on to hydrogen. Now I'm going to excrete potassium. What's going to be my risk for electrolytes? Hypokalemia. You have to know that. Because we're going to give you situations where someone is in some kind of imbalance. And we're going to ask you about what's the body going to do. Sometimes we're looking at urinary compensation. Sometimes we're looking at respiratory compensation. But that's the sequence of events. Okay? Now, so that's compensation. We talked about, with our normal pH, 7.35 to 7.45, you have to learn these values. Those values will be abnormal and on test items. If you don't put this code down, you won't get the test question right. And there's a number of them. Okay. Now you notice with our carbonic acid, okay, what's the normal? Isn't that handy? 35 to 45, that's for memorization. That's just really nice. Okay, so if I don't have enough carbonic acid, hydrogen ions, what's going to happen? What's this side going to, if it goes down, what is that? It's alkalosis. When you write down this key, you write down the words so that when you're testing, you're bam, right on it. If I have too much carbonic, my CO2 is elevated. What kind of state am I in? Acidotic. Exactly. Because you're going to read that and think. Okay, my bicarbonate. So this is my base. Normal is 22 to 26. You just need to learn that. If I don't have enough base, what situation am I in? I'm in acidosis. If I have too much base, what am I in? Alkalosis. Okay. And then we have our O2 8200. Okay, questions about the compensatory mechanism. Now, so we remember that we have acids. My parietal cells in the stomach normally produce hydrochloric acid. So what's my normal pH in my stomach without meds? Yeah, it's like 2. Very, very acid. It eats bacteria for us. It's really protective. Now the problem is, go on steroids because of their great anti-inflammatory properties. I can get too many acids and wind up with gastritis and GI bleeding. Bad. So they give a lot of H blockers. They give a lot of meds to block that so that we don't wind up in the hospital with a heart attack and with a GI bleeding. But normal stomachs. So if I vomit a lot, I'm losing my acids, which means my respiratory rate, if I can't compensate, will decrease. If I lose acids, I'm alkalotic, will decrease in rate and depth. Okay. If I have too much base, we're going to hold on to acids. Now, my GI tract, we have a lot of base in our GI, a lot of bicarbonate in our GI tract. So if I have a lot of diarrhea, what does that put me at risk for? I have a lot of diarrhea, which means I'm losing bicarbonate. What does that put me at risk for? Alkalosis. Duh, Darla, sorry. I'm losing base and put me in for acidosis. That's what you said. Say, raise your hand correctly. I lose my acids, I get alkalotic. I lose my base, I get acidotic. And then you have the compensatory mechanisms from there. The respiratory rate will adjust depending on if I have too many acids, too little acids. The kidneys adjust if I have too much acid, too little acid. Questions about that process? Okay, so we need to remember the acids are in the stomach. What's another way besides vomiting of losing too many acids? What do we do for post-op abdominal surgery? Anybody know? Well, if we have abdominal surgery, we've got a suture line. If they weren't able to do a lap, if we have a large suture line, what would we be worried about with that suture line? That it dehisces and then eviscerates. Your bowel spills out. Okay, that's bad. We want an intact suture line. So what can we do to minimize internal pressure on an abdominal wound? Salem sum, tube down the stomach, sucking out my GI. Okay. Gosh, if it's prolonged, if I wind up being on NG suction for a long period of time, it's sucking out acids. That could be a risk with alkalosis. Just an FYI. I don't see it clinically happen a lot, but it can. Okay, questions about this? Okay. Let's take a look at your... Okay, the arterial, for your handout. So the steps of interpretation, the first, and the film will explain this too. The first name is compensated or uncompensated. We look for a normal pH versus an abnormal pH. That's uncompensated. We look at the last name. I think probably the best thing is for me to quit talking and turn the film on. That would be the help. And then you're going to, as we go through the film, you're going to try and figure out what the ABGs are on these patients. Okay? So it's an activity. Get out a scrap piece of paper if you didn't bring this in, so that you can work this out. You'll have, and I need to tell you, once students figure this out, this is really a wonderful method. They'd like to have the whole test in ABGs. You don't, but... Questions that you have. Okay, I think this is not supposed to be hard. Oh, thank you. You know what's the worst thing is having you guys watch me as I fumble here. If anybody has any wise ideas, I'm open for it. Oh, here we go. There should be a play button. Anybody see the play button? You can just speak right up. It's okay. Should be right here. Oh, okay. Not that. What?
Try clicking where it says video. Is that like a tab?
You mean up here?
No.
In the middle.
Right under title menu, click that.
It should be right here. There's your stop. I see the
Okay,
forward,
now
but I don't see, I see the pause. Where's the play?
Now click it. Try it now.
Nation.
Thank
To
you.
be able to interpret blood gases,
Oh,
base balance. The hydrogen ion is the building
turn
block
off
of
the
the
light,
body's
please?
acid-base balance. The hydrogen ion controls the acidity of the solution. The pH is the measurement of the concentration of the hydrogen ion in extracellular fluid, in this case, the blood. Because it is a negative logarithm, pH increases or becomes more alkalotic as the hydrogen ion concentration in the blood decreases. Conversely, pH decreases or becomes more acidic as the hydrogen ion concentration increases. The normal pH of blood is 7.35 to 7.45. Any variance from this narrow range results in a patient being in an uncompensated state. This can cause potential problems for the patient, from mild all the way up to life-threatening complications. A patient with a pH below 7.35 is said to be in a state of acidosis. In contrast, a patient with a pH above 7.45 is said to be in a state of alkalosis. The body, when functioning normally, can maintain a normal blood pH of 7.35 to 7.45 by means of its internal buffer system. The buffer system acts as a defense mechanism that responds to changes in the hydrogen ion concentration so that the blood remains in the normal 7.35 to 7.45 range. The primary buffer system affecting serum pH is the carbonic acid-bicarbonate relationship. The free hydrogen ion combines with the bicarbonate to form carbonic acid, which then breaks down into water and carbon dioxide. The water can then be excreted by the kidneys, and the carbon dioxide can be exhaled by the lungs during respiration. In order for this buffer system to work, the pulmonary and renal system must be functioning properly. Any disturbance with the lungs or kidneys can upset this delicate balance and result in a state of acidosis or alkalosis. In addition to the pH, other values are utilized in measuring ABGs. These include PCO2, which is the measurement of carbon dioxide in arterial blood, HCO3, which is the bicarbonate in the arterial blood, PO2,
Is
which
this
is the
too
measurement
loud?
of oxygen content in
it's
arterial
okay to tell
blood,
me it's too loud.
and O2 sat, which is the percentage of hemoglobin saturated with
Raise your
oxygen.
hand when it's enough.
The O2 sat is vital in assessing the oxygenation of the tissues. A normal PCO2 is 35 to 45 millimeters of mercury. A PCO2 below 35 is alkalotic, and a PCO2 above 45 is acidotic. Don't get confused. You may think this is backwards, but it's not. An increase in PCO2 leads to an increase in hydrogen ion concentration, which causes the pH to fall. Therefore, an increase in PCO2 leads to a decrease in pH. Conversely, a PCO2 below 35 is alkalotic because there are fewer hydrogen ions. This causes the pH to rise. A normal bicarb, or HCO3, is 23 to 27 milliequivalents per liter. A bicarb value below 23 is called acidotic, and a value above 27 is called alkalotic. This one's easy to remember. It moves in the same direction as the pH. Below normal values means acidosis. Above normal values equals alkalosis. A normal PO2 is 80 to 100 millimeters of mercury. Meanwhile, a normal O2 sat is 96% to 100%. We've discussed acidosis and alkalosis. Now let's broaden that to include all four abnormal acid-base disturbances. These include respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, and finally, metabolic alkalosis. The respiratory disturbances, as their name indicates, have to do with altered ventilation. In turn, metabolic abnormalities are non-respiratory in nature. Metabolic problems can be caused by poor renal function, diabetes, shock, excessive vomiting or diarrhea, large amounts of nasogastric drainage, or fluid and electrolyte imbalances. When these abnormal states occur, the body tries to compensate, striving for a state of equilibrium. The lungs can begin compensating immediately. However, the kidneys, which are the controlling mechanism for metabolic compensation, are much slower to react. They start compensating within 24 hours, but may take up to 5 days to reach their maximum potential. Even with these mechanisms in place, the body may not be able to attain equilibrium. Now for the fun part, the family tree of an ABG, or name that baby. First, start by writing down these normal values. pH, 7.35 to 7.45. PCO2, 35 to 45. HCO3, 23 to 27.
Ours varies, I know, for testing, 22 to 26, but
These lab
know
values
that
will
for
be
this,
used to
this is
determine
their
whether
value.
your patient is in respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, metabolic alkalosis, or a normal state. As we said earlier, this is called the family tree of an ABG. Each ABG has a first name, a middle name, and a last name. Think of it as you would naming a baby. The first name only has two choices, compensated or uncompensated. The last name also only has two choices, acidosis or alkalosis. The middle name has more choices, so we'll save it for last. The pH always determines the baby's first and last name. In this example, the pH is 7.23. Is this normal? If it is, the baby's first name is compensated. If it's not, the first name is uncompensated. So what is the first name?
It's a step-by-step approach. Go through it and be writing these down, each one, okay?
Right, uncompensated. Next we'll choose the last name. Is the pH acidosis or alkalosis? If you said 7.23 is acidotic, you're right. The baby's last name is acidosis. So now we have a first name of uncompensated and a last name of acidosis. How do we determine the middle name? We're going to determine the baby's father. Look at the CO2 value of 32. Is that acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? Refer to the normal values that you wrote down. It's alkalotic, so write down alkalosis beneath the 32. Next, look at the HCO3 value of 14. Is it acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? It's acidotic, so write down acidosis underneath the 14. Now you have alkalosis under CO2 and acidosis under HCO3. Refer to the baby's last name. What was it? It was acidosis. The father of the baby will have the same last name as the baby. Where do you find acidosis? Under CO2 or HCO3? Right, under HCO3, which is metabolic. So write in metabolic for the baby's middle name. His name is uncompensated metabolic acidosis. Remember, CO2 represents respiratory and HCO3 represents metabolic. Wasn't that easy? Let's try another. In the next example, the pH is 7.10.
Wasn't that easy?
Is the baby's first name compensated or uncompensated? You're right, it's uncompensated. Now his last name. Is it acidosis or alkalosis? The pH at 7.10 is acidotic. So baby's first name is uncompensated and his last name is acidosis. Now let's choose his middle name. Go back to the lab values. The CO2 is 63. Is that acidosis or alkalosis? Yes, it's acidosis. So write that under the value of CO2. Next, look at the HCO3, which is 28. Refer back to your normal values. Is that acidosis or alkalosis? It's alkalosis, so write alkalosis under the HCO3 value of 28. Now you have acidosis under CO2 and alkalosis under HCO3. HCO3. Refer to the baby's last name. What was it? It was acidosis. Who is the baby's father? The father of the baby will have the same last name as the baby. Where do you find acidosis? Under CO2 or HCO3? Right, under CO2, which is respiratory. So write in respiratory for the baby's middle name. His name is uncompensated respiratory acidosis. You're on a roll. Let's do the next one. The pH is 7.51. Is this normal? No, so it's uncompensated. The baby's first name is uncompensated. Now his last name. Is 7.51 acidotic or alkalotic? Yes, it's alkalotic, so baby's last name is alkalosis. Now let's find his father and choose his middle name. The CO2 value is 28. Look at the normal values that you wrote down. Is CO2 acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? Right, it's alkalotic, so write alkalosis under the CO2 value of 28. Next, look at the HCO3, which is 25. Is this acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? It's normal, so write normal under the HCO3 value of 25. Refer back to the baby's last name. What is it? It is alkalosis. Who is the baby's father? Remember, the father of the baby will have the same last name as the baby. Where do you find alkalosis? Under CO2 or HCO3? Right, under CO2, which is respiratory. Fill in respiratory under the baby's middle name. So the baby's full name is uncompensated respiratory alkalosis. Let's keep going. It's fun to name these babies. In this example, the pH is 7.54. Is this normal or not? It's not, so this is uncompensated. Write uncompensated under baby's first name. Is the pH at 7.54 acidotic or alkalotic? Right, it's alkalotic, so write alkalosis for baby's last name. Now let's find his father and choose the baby's middle name. The CO2 is 44. Look at your normal lab values. Is 44 acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? It's normal, so write normal under the CO2 value of 44. Now look at the HCO3. It's 35. Is this acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? It's alkalotic, so write alkalosis under the HCO3 value of 35. Refer back to the baby's last name. It is alkalosis. The father of the baby has the same last name as the baby. Where do you find alkalosis? Under CO2 or HCO3? Right, under HCO3, which is metabolic. So fill in metabolic for the baby's middle name. Therefore, the baby's name is uncompensated metabolic alkalosis. In the next set of values, the pH is 7.36. Is that normal or not? Yes, it's normal, so write compensated for the baby's first name. Now, because this is in the normal range of 7.35 to 7.45, it's not actively either acidosis or alkalosis. However, it is much closer to the acidotic side of normal at 7.36. The body compensates, but it very seldom overcompensates. So because the pH is on the acidotic side at 7.36, the baby's last name is acidosis. Now let's identify the baby's father and choose his middle name. The CO2 is 55. Is this normal, acidotic, or alkalotic? Yes, it's acidotic. So write acidosis beneath the CO2 value of 55. Now look at the HCO3. It's 34. Is this acidosis, alkalosis, or normal? It's alkalotic, so write alkalosis beneath the HCO3 value of 34. Refer back to the baby's last name. Remember that the father of the baby has the same last name as the baby, which is acidosis. Do we have acidosis under CO2 or HCO3? It's under CO2, so the baby's middle name is respiratory. His full name is compensated respiratory acidosis. You see, a compensated condition is interpreted the same way as uncompensated. If the pH is normal, but either the CO2 or HCO3 is abnormal, just look at which side of 7.40 the pH lies. Below 7.40 is the acidotic side, and above 7.40 is the alkalotic side. In the next example, the pH is 7.43. Is this normal? Yes, it is. So the baby's first name is compensated. 7.43 is in the normal range, so determine which end of the range it's on. Is it closer to the acidotic side or the alkalotic side? Right, it's above 7.40 and closer to the alkalotic side. So the baby's last name is alkalosis, unless both CO2 and HCO3 are normal, which we'll discuss in a few moments. So the baby's first name is compensated and the last name is alkalosis. Now let's identify the baby's father and choose the middle name. The CO2 is 30. Is this acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? Correct, it's alkalotic, so write alkalosis beneath the CO2 value of 30. The HCO3 is 20. Is this acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? It's acidotic, so write acidosis beneath the HCO3 value of 20. Refer back to the baby's last name, which is alkalosis. The father of the baby has the same last name. Where do we find alkalosis? Under CO2 or HCO3? Yes, it's under CO2, which is respiratory. The baby's middle name is respiratory, and the baby's full name is compensated respiratory alkalosis. In the next set of values, the pH is 7.41. Is this normal? Yes, so the first name is compensated. 7.41 is normal, but is it closer to the acidotic side or the alkalotic side? It's closer to the alkalotic side, so put alkalosis for the last name. Now look at the CO2, which is 39. Is this acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? It's normal, so write normal beneath the CO2 value of 39. Next, look at the HCO3, which is 25. Is this acidotic, alkalotic, or normal? Right, this is normal. So write normal beneath the HCO3 value of 25. Now let's identify the baby's father. We have an interesting situation. We called the baby's last name alkalosis because the pH was above 7.40, but still in the normal range. However, both the CO2 and HCO3 are normal. Remember, the same rule applies. The baby and the father must have the same name. If both the CO2 and HCO3 are normal, then the baby must have a last name of normal. Refer back to the pH. It was 7.41, which is within the normal range of 7.35 to 7.45. Instead of a compensated alkalosis, this baby ABG is actually a normal ABG. The key to determining the difference between a compensated ABG and a normal ABG lies in whether either the CO2 or HCO3 are abnormal. If both are normal and the pH is normal, you have a normal ABG. Just remember, the baby's last name must always be the same as the father's. See how far you come, all these different values, but you can interpret all of them by remembering the basic rules of naming the baby. Now let's try one more that's just a little different. The pH is 7.12. Is this normal? No, so the first name is uncompensated. Is 7.12 acidotic or alkalotic? acidotic. So the baby's first name is uncompensated and the last name is acidosis. Now let's find his middle name. The CO2 is 58. Is this normal, acidotic, or alkalotic? Right, it's acidotic. Write acidosis below the CO2 value of 58. Now look at the HCO3, which is 16. Is this normal, acidotic, or alkalotic? Correct, it's acidotic also. So write acidosis beneath the HCO3 value of 16. Remember, the baby's last name is always the same as the father's. The baby's last name is acidosis. Now look at the CO2 and HCO3. Which one is named acidosis? Both of them are. Both CO2 and HCO3 have the same name as the baby's last name. That means both of them are the baby's father. So the baby's middle name is respiratory and metabolic. So his full name is uncompensated respiratory and metabolic acidosis. This is referred to as a mixed acid-base disturbance. Now, as you'll recall, we talked earlier about PO2 and O2 sat. These are the other two components that make up the ABG interpretation. Although they are not utilized in determining an acidotic or alkalotic state, they are instrumental in assessing the patient's condition, particularly his or her respiratory status. Now let's tie the ABG analysis to possible causes and treatment modalities.